We're so glad everybody's here. As I said before, Jason's behind the scenes today, so I am trying to fill some very big shoes, and happy to see everyone, and looking forward to our discussion today. I think we've got, Jason, you're behind the scenes right now, right? I don't see you on camera. Thank you everyone for being here for the networking part. It's always great to just see it's great to see new faces as well as the ones I've seen many times before, and hear what you're working on and what your current challenges are. We're going to switch over, so thank you for those that are just coming in. As you notice, I am not Jason Brett, so we just want to give a shout out to him again. He's behind the scenes recovering from COVID. We want him to stay off camera and hopefully get back in bed after this as well, so that he's back to 100% pretty quickly. We want to thank our sponsors, sponsors of Product Coffee to start with, and both are on. So I'll start with Method. Jeff, thank you and Method for what you do and being a part of this. Of course, John Mansour, Product Management University. We appreciate your contributions and keeping Product Coffee going. The other one also is Feature Upvote, which also we use for Product Coffee, so productcoffee.com/ideas. If you want to check that out, that's where you can use that to vote on future sessions. But check out Feature Upvote as well as a tool that you might want to use in your organization. So with no further ado then, Jason Rome, I'm very excited to introduce you as your SVP of Digital Strategy and Customer Experience for Method, and we are looking forward to today's discussion around modern product maturity. So with that, I will turn it over.
Awesome, thanks. And I will do my best to monitor the chat, but please interrupt me, make this conversational as we're going through today. I think, you know, John and team, as you guys have been going through a couple of the pain points, I think I'll touch on some of them. So today, you know, thoughts on modern product, it's a big area. And so I'll define what it is here shortly. But as mentioned, you know, to introduce myself, I had a one-on-one with one of my team members yesterday, and he started out by just talking about, you know, gratitude. And, you know, I thought that was a good way to introduce yourself. So what am I grateful for today? On the left, my family, my wife and my two dogs up in the mountains. Took that picture 2 weeks ago. So is one. Second one, you'll see in my bottom left, I'm using our internal slide template. You'll see the words Method, Global Logic, and Hitachi. But when I started in this space, I worked for a company called Skookum Digital Works, and then like Facebook dropped we dropped the Digital Works and just became Skookum. But I think I'm grateful for that, just because joining the company when we were, you know, small 50-person company, and now I work for a company with 26,000 employees. And so, but the opportunity over the years to work with a lot of really awesome people that have taught me a lot, even the word modern product, one of our product strategists, Brennan Fitzgerald, kind of started using that word internally, and I've adopted it. But the cool thing about that is it gave me the opportunity to, you know, in some of my career, I was a CX and design leader. Some of it I was in product, some of it I was in sales, but I was really bad at writing contracts, so they kicked me out. Some of it I was, you know, leading agile work, and some of it I was doing digital strategy. And so I've gotten to see what these different teams are working on, and that's helped kind of inform like what we mean by modern product. So what I hope to cover today is, why is modern product important? So what's the advantage? You know, how do we make a case for it? I heard some folks talking about going from project to product-based organizations, and this definitely fits into that paradigm. How do you recognize modern product? Like, what does it look like in the organization? What are the signs of it? What do we mean by it? What holds companies back? Like, why is it hard? Like, where do we struggle with it? I'm passionate about that topic because I think, you know, getting the opportunity, you know, and the great thing about where I get to sit is I probably get to talk to 100 different companies every year that are doing product work, and get to see what they're struggling with and different things. And so there's a lot of you know, I think agile and product and the way it's designed, it's a logical process that we might all see, but there's a lot of emotion that comes with doing it well, and like managing through those emotions and a change. And it's not necessarily like how we're structured to think about work. So I'll talk about that. And then, you know, I always like to try to give folks maybe something that they can do this week and take back to the organization. So what are some like really tactical, easy starting places that can improve what you're working on? So going through. All right. So why is modern product important? I'm going to start here even before I introduce what it is. So I think, yeah, I heard someone in the introduction talking about needing to clone themselves. And so we're seeing this everywhere, but at the end of the day, expectations are exceeding capacity. I think, we were also talking about clients wanting more and more changes. For some organizations, it's unfilled positions, design, technology, product. For some organizations, it's not having the right senior level of talent and having qualified candidates. Sometimes it's organizational debt. Sometimes it's owning products with a lot of technical debt. Sometimes it's spending time working on the wrong thing, having dates that we have to hit and make working around those. Sometimes it's budget limitations. We see a lot of tech companies that have cut some jobs here recently based on their earnings forecast. Sometimes it's all the pivots we have to make. But at the end of the day, there's always more work to do than there's time. And we really, one thing that I think gets lost in the product world sometimes, that especially from a business standpoint, is you can't get developers time back. And so like really cherishing their time and what they're working on and having them working on the right thing is really important, because you don't get that time back. And so, making sure you're maximizing that, there's a lot upstream that has to go right to do that. And so working in a better way helps that. The second reason why this is important is it's more fun. So we spend a lot of time at work, and there's a lot of research on the importance of relationships and the people you work with and impacting your overall happiness. We all like work-life balance, but having a cohesive way of working, having good relationships, having clarity, having autonomy, being empowered in what we do, makes our jobs a lot more fun. We spend a lot of time here, and it should be fun. This is one of the coolest jobs in the world. And so, we get to really solve some of the hardest problems. We get to impact people's lives. We get to do work at scale. It's definitely a pinch me moment. A lot of the times I joke that, doing product or in consulting, some days you wake up with a rational confidence that everyone should listen to me. And then the next day you wake up and you're like, and it's imposter syndrome. Why would anyone listen to me? Like how am I getting to make these huge decisions that have massive impact? So that's why modern product is important. In terms of how you recognize it, when we use modern product and in terms of like how we use it at Method, just to give a backdrop, sometimes it's an assessment that we'll do with a client of, hey, let's look at your end-to-end organization, software development lifecycle, figure out where you need help. But more tactically, we have a core value that is learn to teach and teach to learn. So when we're working with our clients, it's not just about we want to deliver the value, it's we want to deliver the ways of working. So we're always trying to empower and improve process and improve how that company works. And so this is also something that teams can do to better understand how a client might be able to improve their process, improve their ways of working. But then it's also something that understanding how a company is operating and how they are building helps us fit in to work alongside them a little bit better. So the framework that we've developed just helps us get an understanding of where a company is and if they're interested in our perspective, how they might improve. So a couple of the signs of a modern product company. So the first one is vision and alignment. I love this idea of trade-offs. I think as product managers, like product is a series of trade-off decisions that we have to make every day. And having the right alignment of the right way to frame those trade-offs and the right way to communicate those trade-offs back to stakeholders across the organization is immensely important. We've all had the dreaded scope creep conversation and scope management, trading dates for features, trading different features against each other, working on new features versus working on technical debt. It's really hard, and it's a huge part of our role. So, what we look for when I think about modern product, how well articulated is the vision of where the company's going? Like what's the role of this product? How measurable is it? We'll talk a lot about measurability today, but I think there's a lot of different ways to do it, and it's still something that is really hard for a lot of companies. Governance. Is the governance structure that we're putting in place, does it help drive alignment for teams, or does it create bottlenecks for teams? Autonomy, do product teams have the proper autonomy? to do product well, it's, falling in love with that problem, being close to the user. We talked earlier about sales versus, product setting the vision. And really in a modern product organization, you want the teams that are closest to the users on a day-to-day basis, empowered to make those decisions, but they have to be able to be held accountable back to business outcomes at the end of the day. So we're connecting that autonomy and vision. And then prioritization. Do teams and departments have a shared understanding of how prioritization works? One of the things in working in both CX and product, CCX teams go off and they do a design sprint or do a 12-week project, and they do a journey map, and they'd come back with a whole bunch of ideas. And then they go over to the product team and they drop this journey map in a 50-page slide deck and say, hey, here's all the problems with your journey and everything that's going wrong with your product. Can you fix this? And the team and the product team would say, hey, I've got an 18-month backlog right now. Are you going to deliver me another Scrum team to deliver all this stuff? Oh, I'm already working on a lot of this stuff. So harmonizing how teams think about priority across the organization and bringing that together so that there's a shared understanding of how we prioritize things. So this is the first big pillar that we think about. Any questions, thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I'm going to play just devil's advocate here, Jason. So in your first two bullet points there, I couldn't agree more. But what and I think this is, I'll put it into a scenario. My team has a bigger impact on the business than your team, right? How do you, when we start applying these measurements and our vision in terms of how it impacts our business, how do you quantify? And what I'm getting at here is doesn't this lead to where you have multiple teams competing for, I impact the business more, or I'm impacting the business goals more, or something like that when it's internally focused? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm going to go into it in depth, and actually it's I appreciate you segueing me into the next slide, John, which is structured collaboration. It takes a village here. And I think one of the hardest things for product teams and what you're talking about in general is this idea of capital P versus lowercase p product. And capital P product is your product makes money directly, people pay to use the product. And lowercase p is your product facilitates value for the business. And so a lot of times in the organization, we're working on products that facilitate value for the business. They don't generate revenue directly. And I think one of the struggles here is a lot of the people that have written books about product for the last 20 years come out of Silicon Valley, and they work on products that people pay to use. It's if you work on TurboTax, people pay for TurboTax. If you work on Facebook, Facebook generates money by people using it directly through their ad platform. So now if you're in a product organization and you're working on the API platform, you're 4 or 5 steps removed from direct business value, and that's really hard. Even if you're working on a e-commerce platform, again, the people buy the merchandise, they don't buy access to the e-commerce site. And so I think knowing that it can't be competitive and it takes a village to accomplish this is really important. And so I've got actually a couple of deep dives, so let me get down to that one in a minute about how to structure that, but knowing that everyone has a role and defining those boundaries. So with that, we think about structured collaboration. So what we look for in how teams work together is, are teams cross-functional, or are they siloed into the organization? Do they have a culture of open conversation, learning, autonomy, feedback, training, and partnership? How are decisions made? Agile team design. So, John, this fourth one is really important, which is yes, my product may at the end of the day generate more value, but I'm potentially dependent on your data lake. I'm dependent on your API gateway. I'm dependent on a lot of other things that have to happen in the organization to facilitate this. And so, but it's important to understand the relationship between those products. So everyone's aligned eventually at the end of the day to outcomes for the client. And then organizational alignment. So how do product teams interface with marketing, operations, risk, the lines of business, the comms team, and the finance team is really important. So, but that's a good question, John. And I want to spend a deep dive into that today. So I think it's an excellent call out. Did you have a second one? I thought you had
Well, no, and it was, to me, I think one of the hardest things about our profession in product management and as it goes through product development is it becomes so hard to measure the value to our business in relative terms. Easier for things to generate revenue, but it seems to me if you start with the value measurement of what is the actual quantifiable, measurable value we provide to the client, it seems like everything gets easier. Then you automatically back into the value for the business. So even if you're working on a platform that enables something else that ultimately leads to clients spending money on the website to buy goods, it seems like it's still easier to start with what's the value to the end customer and how do we measure that value and then back it into what's it mean for the business. Am I wrong on that one, or am I off base in my thinking there?
No, I'm going to jump to the end here. So we're gonna play jazz a little bit. But yeah, I think.
Well, that's all right. I don't want to throw you out of sequence here
No.
or take you off your game.
No. Jeff Meddy's smiling because he knows like this is in sync is out of sync for me. So I think you're exactly right. It has to cascade and it has to connect the dots. And so if you look at this diagram from left to right, you're thinking about the customer journey, and from top to bottom, you're thinking about kind of layers away from direct access to customers. Now, this diagram changes depending on B2C versus B2B versus B2B2C. So there's a lot of nuance here. But to your point, there's only so many business objectives in the world. Like there's not 150 different ways to measure value. There's probably like 10 to 15, and a lot of them are variants on the same theme. At the end of the day, for the business, it's revenue, profitability, loss avoidance, retention, market share, product diversity, compliance, sustainability, competitive advantage, price support, and asset leverage. Like those are the things the business wants. And so thinking about how your product facilitates that. Now, to your point, John, like you might be a bunch of hops away from that. So if you're working on the website in e-commerce, it's a little bit easier because you're looking at customer acquisition, lead gen, conversion, customer acquisition costs, your bounce rate, onboarding. Like it's easy to see, okay, I get customers to the website through SEO and I drive them through a conversion event, and then I'm handing them off to the onboarding team or a comms team. Now, as if you're the service CX team, though, if you're building a product that helps, manage their account, manage a return process, manage a dispute, if you're in a bank, it might be a little harder to measure that value. You're trying to avoid a disloyalty event by providing a really good service to that customer so that they stay loyal to working with the brand. So you're more focused on customer effort scoring, true first call resolution, which is what TFCR is. Digital adoption, problem volume. Maybe you're trying to drive calls out of the call center and keep them in digital or in chat to drive costs down. Now, if your product supports the frontline experience, you're looking for that employee NPS, associate effort score, the usage of those tools, efficiency, automation, performance, coverage of needs, usability. As you work down, if you're working on an administration and intelligence platform, maybe you're measuring value through the quality of data that you bring in, the accessibility of those views, and the utilization that help people make decisions. Now, if you're all the way down in the platform and data layer, you're starting to look at the reliability of the services I'm building, performance at scale, data quality. Are people actually using the services that we're writing? The cost of hosting, am I, ramping up and down capacity to manage this right? Incident response rate, your things like mean time to respond, mean time between failures, and release frequency. But at the end of the day, if you really wanted to, you could look at incident response rate and kind of walk that all the way back up to, okay, if we respond to an incident, it means there's less bugs. It means we have higher uptime. It means our customers are more satisfied. It means we drive retention of customers. You can kind of connect it all the way back up. But this is the number one thing to do. Is really understand how your product drives value and have that story aligned and have that conversation with the business. Questions or thoughts on this one? I know it's a bit of an eye chart, but. All right, if not, we can jump back up in the presentation. So just recapping where we are. So vision alignment, setting those metrics, team structure. So, making sure we know how teams relate to each other, how teams work within a team, and how the digital organization relates to the rest of the organization. The third thing that's really important, which we talked about, is continuous discovery and feedback. So how are we falling in love with the problem all over again? you guys were talking about this in the beginning a little bit, of like really understanding like what those user needs are, who our customer segments are, and what the true job to be done of our product is. And so there's a lot in this toolkit. There's a lot with human-centered design. We'll talk a little bit about this one as well, of, hey, what are some incremental ways to improve how you're testing and be more intentional based on the type of product you have. And then the last one is continuous development and delivery. So how are we managing releases? How is the maturity of DevOps? How clear is our system architecture in terms of scalability? Do our product design and developers have a good experience? Do we have a clear process? Are we managing knowledge? How are we managing testing? And then do we have the right analytics in place for feedback loops, and are our teams able to improve the process? So at a high level, those are the 4 big categories of the modern product, the things we look at. Anything that we didn't touch on there, or any questions on the overall flow for the group?
Jason, I'm going to throw out one, and if this doesn't fit in right here, and you got it later on, but I've worked with a lot of, so I've been an enterprise and I've been a startup, and I've also consulted with a lot of different companies. And I noticed a trend, especially when you're in all of those cases, really, you've got consultants or outside teams that maybe you're bringing in, right? So maybe you're bringing in a UX team, and maybe you're outsourcing that part of the development. Do you think this still applies and fits when you've got teams that are truly disparate, meaning they're not even within the same company? How do you keep them cohesive and following the same, kind of guidelines, if you will?
Yeah, no, it's a good call out. I think, making sure that, from an outside, when you're bringing a lot of outside parties, making sure the parties you're bringing in, that they put your company's jersey on when they come in the door, is the key thing. Like you've gotta, like, they can't keep being the outside vendor. Like they can't keep wearing that jersey. Like if you're going to do product well, it has to be one team operating as one team. Like I always tell folks, if when you have consultants, when you're hiring somebody, and you should be able to just join a random stand-up, and you shouldn't be able to tell who's on what team. Like if you can, something's not happening well. I think one of the problems in the past here has been digital and solutioning. It's not just about the outcome, it's about the process and the why, because we're always learning. Like we're always making mistakes. Another one of my favorite product quotes is, a lot of product is just being a little less wrong every day. And if you're not bringing, if the whole team's not coming along for that ride, those consultants are going to go away, and you're going to drop all that knowledge, because you're only going to understand what they did and not why and how they did it. And when I'm working with someone, I want them to be able to replicate the results I got using the methodologies and continue to use those methodologies. And so, yes, you can be successful in multi-vendor solutions. I think going back to that structured collaboration is really important. So we'll talk a little bit today about team topologies, but that's like a really big area to dive into. That's complex. So, but yeah, that's, and as someone who, I work with a couple clients right now where we've got 4 or 5 vendors, and that, hey, one person's ripping and replacing the ERP. You've got someone else who, an e-com platform vendor, a loyalty platform vendor, a front end vendor. You've got, a CRM vendor, and like harmonizing all that as well as their core IT team is tough and important. Sometimes you got one team running the PMO versus one team who's doing the product work. But yeah, it's a tough one. But I would say, even when it's not outside consultants, a lot of organizations have that same like turf mentality, especially between like CX, product, IT, business, and design. Like it's very easy for those to turn into turf wars. I think it's a good question.
Yeah.
Jerry, I saw your hand up as well.
Yeah, I don't want to belabor the point. I want you to be able to finish your presentation, but I have a real life story of that, where the same development team used outside vendors twice. The first time they were treated as a third party. The second time they were integrated into the team, and it became the scenario you described, where when you walked into stand-up, you did not know who was internal and who was external. And the second one was far more successful than the first. So
yeah.
just
no, I mean, I like to tell people like, hey, This isn't Mad Men. This isn't Don Draper. Like, we're not going to get to the end of the project and like rip something off of an easel and like wow you. I coach our teams like, hey, there should be no good surprises or bad surprises in a sprint demo, in an executive summary. Like, if there's a surprise, you missed it. Like, like no surprises is like one of the advice points. So, but I think, you know, this hits on some of the themes of like why doing product well is really hard. The first one, and this is the famous, you know, some people here are going to see a duck, some are going to see a bunny. People are really uncomfortable with ambiguity. So if you look back at how IT projects got done in the 90s, you know, the business handed requirements off to IT, they got a nice BRD, they funded a project, and then they, you know, sat on them until the dates were met. And then, you know, they are all blamed each other for like scope creep and change management and stuff. Agile, you know, it doesn't allow you to see that far into the future because Agile is always changing. And that's really uncomfortable for people, of like knowing that you could go into a test and you could need to pivot. And the one thing here with this ambiguity is, you know, it's really hard to let go. It's like, I hate the term fail fast that gets used in Agile. You know, especially in the US, like failure has such a semantic weight to it, from like grade school, middle school, high school, college. Like, failure is a very bad thing. And really the idea of failure is not what you're doing in product. Like, you are making calculated mistakes and you are learning quickly. And so switching this idea of like ambiguity as a good thing, where it opens up opportunities, but knowing how to make decisions, versus feeling uncomfortable and feeling like you need these dates and certainty, you have to have a certain amount of trust. The second thing that's really hard, and we just touched on this, is operating in very ambitious silos. And I say ambitious silos because everyone wants to do all the things right now in product that I see. You know, IT is like, hey, we're going to move to the cloud. We're going to spin up a data lake. We're going to move to microservices. We're going to move our architecture to invented. And then the PMO is like, yeah, we're going to move to scaled agile. We're going to put this new process in place. The product team's going, hey, yeah, we're going to bring in like lean product and lean UX. And then the design team's saying, hey, we're going to do a design system and we're going to do human-centered design. And then, you know, an innovation lab gets stood up and they all get thrown in together. And you hope, you know, what comes out at the end of it is going to be good product. All these things are happening at once, and it's very ambitious, and these things don't get connected, and you end up with the aforementioned kind of turf wars of everyone seeing the problem from their standpoint, the blind man and the elephant parable here. The third one, and I think this was part of the early conversation, is leaving the business behind. This is also, you know, partially committing to Agile. You know, Agile requires funding teams and trusting them, not funding projects as much. And if you have a business cycle that's still running on a year, Agile operates on a much faster cycle than that. I see some not vigorous nodding heads. But if the business doesn't get on board with what this means, like, they control the money, and you end up with a lot of like wacky projects and you know, asynchronous things. You know, even PI planning happens on 12 weeks. Fiscal cycles are on you know, 12 months. And so how do you sync those things up? And the expectations of different groups are just way out of whack on that one. The fourth one is taking an academic approach instead of an intentional approach. You know, it's, you know, a lot of people want to do things the right way. And there's a lot of different opinions on what the right way is in product and design and architecture, and making sure you're intentional about applying those patterns versus like, hey, we're just going to do this. One of my favorite examples is, you know, when Sprint came out by the Google Ventures team originally, everyone got really excited about design sprints. You know, it's this 5-day process. It's logical. You're going to do this day 1, day 2, day 3. Man, I tried to run with a client, and by like day 2.5, everyone was like exhausted. And so we're like, okay, we can't run design sprints by the book. Enterprise clients just can't give that much time up, and it exhausts people. And by Friday, like, everyone's just dragging, and no one has that kind of time. So we turned it into more of like a 3-week thing that gave time for elaboration, testing, getting access to users that lived within the enterprise cycle. But we see this a lot with, you know, different Agile methodologies, different certifications, different methods of doing design sprints, where, you know, sometimes we're running the process without understanding what we're trying to get out of it. And then this last one is going too big, too fast. really a lot of these things work better when you get them working well with one Scrum team and then you scale from there, not when you top down change a lot of this at once for the organization. And so a lot of people try to completely change everything about how they're working, and it causes a massive velocity drop because they're not able to apply it to their own organization. I'm going to check the chat real quick. I see some good things going through.
Did you get an image of how I get up in the morning?
Yeah.
Pretty much like how I start my day. Yeah, that one. Yeah.
This morning, mine was like crawl, drink coffee, come finish my slide deck. I procrastinated to get ready for this presentation, and then jump in the third day of PI planning. So that was my morning. What can you do now? So a couple of quick things here. Again, we have these 4 categories. Within each one of these, there's kind of 4 things we look at when we're measuring maturity. Can't talk about all of them in one time. So what I wanted to pick for, some of these take a lot of work. Like changing your DevOps process for your organization is going to be a lot of work. And so some of these make sense to do because they inform others now. And some of them, generally you need to do them well before you can do them. So like before you can improve how you do road mapping and planning, you need to have better measurement and prioritization, for example. And so these things build on each other. So we're going to focus on, hey, what are some of the lower effort, and lower effort is relative depending on the ambition of improving these things that you can do as a leading indicator for your organization. All right, so quick quiz moment. Everyone kind of go through and take a look at these. Score yourself out of 30 for each of these 6 questions. And we'll give everyone 1 second to reflect on that. And I'll need at least 1 or 2 brave volunteers to share their score. So.
So Jason, while we're waiting for people to compute here, have you ever seen, you were talking about the cost of development and how, sometimes we split hairs over how much this project costs, how much this project costs. Have you ever seen a client take a macro approach and say, listen, we have, whatever goes under the product development umbrella cost us 10 million a year. Unless we plan on, firing people to scale down or hiring to scale up, what am I going to get for my 10 million? If I invest that 10 million, what am I going to get for it, and how quickly will I get it? Now, bring to me the projects that are going to give us the best ROI on our $10 million worth of R&D or development engineering. Have you ever seen anyone do that?
Man, that'd be a great contract to get. I'd say not all at once, like they'll do it in segments. It's definitely an ask to, okay, let's look at our, so we did a project with a client and they said, hey, we've got 10, 15 Scrum teams that are all working on different things on the product. We don't have a rationale for the business case. Can you work with each of these teams and see, hey, which of the teams are working on what's most valuable and where is the bottleneck in our organization that we should be fixing and focusing on, and then help us rationalize those team structures against that to make sure that we're devoting the right resources. I think this is one of the weaknesses of Agile in the enterprise is, every product manager gets the same team size and then they all work on things and no one's really looking at prioritization between product teams. Even as you work on something like Safe Agile, there's really not a control mechanism for saying like, hey, this one product is providing no incremental value because it's a local optimization that we're just improving vanity metrics that don't matter versus this other team would increase throughput and value delivery for our organization. And then again, it depends on the product. Like we do have a client right now who's working on a pretty large contract for us, and they are assigning, we have kind of build teams that are looking at certain metrics that will get measured on and actually paid out on those. But then we have other teams that are just SLA based around your kind of classic like run ops, maintain type contract work. So the neutral ground I've found with clients is we'll sign a year-long contract and then we'll do kind of a work order every quarter around program increment planning. and kind of iteratively reassigning resources dynamically on a 12-week basis allows us to like reset expectations every quarter. So we're not chasing after something with low results. It gives us the right cadence of pivots while having certainty and making both of our procurement teams happy enough. So I see what you're coming from in different variations of forms, but especially for a lot of procurement organizations, like that level of ambiguity is still like really hard in writing a contract.
Yeah.
So anyone get a, oh, let's see, I'm getting some, are we getting some scores in here? No, just.
Yeah, there's some 10s and 11s. I think I saw 10.
Yeah, that's, all right. Which question was hardest for people on here? Like which questions were we getting ones on the most? Anyone want to share theirs?
Hey, so I was looking at this, and I kind of expected a lower score on my organization, so I'm actually kind of glad I got to 10. I'm not sure exactly how I got the points, but so I think the interesting part for me was to think about the metrics and the metrics that we have. So I work for a Chinese organization, so the culture is very different from what we are used to here in, like, I'm going to say, in North America. We have a bunch of metrics, but they are not relevant nor shared, nor, like it's a mess. So it's like, from 3, I was like, okay, I guess I'm losing a lot of points from now on because the metrics didn't make any sense. So that was a very interesting thing to reflect on, actually.
Yeah.
And I'll jump in, Jason. I feel like in my world, I'm an NCR, fun fact, I lead product management for global sales operations. So it's a little bit different because I lead a product team that's focused internally. But when I look at that from either my objectives or from just the broader company perspective, right? And I think, Jerry, you were saying this too. We were kind of chatting on the chat. We have very clearly articulated business objectives. I'm pretty sure they're available on the internet. But how that correlates into anything else in these later questions. So I feel like for me, almost like there were questions in between 2 and 3, which is to me where NCR gets lost, because I would say we would score highly on number 1, but number 2, absolutely not. We say the word digital a lot, but just slapping that into every other sentence doesn't actually mean we have a digital strategy, right? And then how we get from 1 and 2 to number 3 is where it's like squirrel. Right? Like our teams have success metrics that they can impact and trust, but what those success metrics had to do with 1 or 2 is lost even to me. Like, yeah. I feel like I got spun around in the hallway somehow. And I'm like telling my team, like, yep, you're going to make a difference. I'm like, I don't know how, but sure.
Did you say NCR, the payments company?
I did. Yeah, National Cash Register Corporation.
Well, congratulations then. I saw the news about Premier this morning. So, saw you guys in the Wall Street Journal today. So, I work with a lot of private equity, so I actually know of NCR, but yeah, no, that's exactly the point. Is you have business objectives and you have digital team objectives, and a lack of connective tissue between the two. I see a lot of like vanity metrics in the space. Like I'll see companies that, hey, the popular thing to measure is daily active users, monthly active users.
Yeah.
Like if you can't monetize someone's attention, like maybe you don't want users to be highly active. I think about if you're a health insurance company, like daily active users might mean that people are struggling with their healthcare claims and they're have to logging in to check it out because you're not sending them an email about a proactive notification. And so there's a lot of these metrics, and I also see a lot of dashboards that people spend so much time on so many metrics that you end up with a noise over signal problem. How we look at this, I think there's a couple strategies that I see for people in terms of measurement prioritization. Some organizations will use what I call an abstraction strategy, which is, hey, we're going to use NPS as our organizational currency. We've proved that this is the step that gets skipped a lot, is we've proved that NPS correlates to additional revenue based on, hey, customers with a higher NPS have a higher LTV. That step is skipped a lot. I think, NPS gets sold really well as a silver bullet to the executive team, but it has it's a much better B2C metric than it is B2B, for example. And it has higher correlation there. So, and then relational versus transactional, there's a lot of nuance. But if you as an organization can say like, hey, this one metric, so like YouTube, attention, like, hey, attention is the one metric that matters. Everyone connect what you're doing back to attention, and you'll drive value for the business. The second one is goal-based, which is more of the OKRs, which is teams on a quarterly basis are setting objectives and key results. This one gives you the most flexibility, and it's a great kind of gateway into setting measurement. And then the third one is being able to directly correlate a observable behavior like, site traffic to, hey, when site traffic goes up 10%, we see an X% increase in revenue because we know our throughput. Which brings us to this slide. And so this is one where, depending on where your product or your product teams fit in, these are just some of the common things that you would measure for that team. So the quick win here is really try to write one objective and try to combine that objective back to a business goal and just 2 or 3 key results for what the team's working on for the next quarter. And sometimes, people talk about SMART goals, like sometimes key results aren't going to be SMART. Sometimes you have to lay the foundation for product work. I think about something like analytics. People have asked me before, what's the business case for analytics? And I said, well, analytics is the business case machine. Like, I don't know, like put an analytics in place and I'll give you, it's like asking us to do math without a calculator. So, some things aren't going to have like that SMART goal, and that's okay. Sometimes I think people get obsessed with having a perfect metric, and understanding that someone's going to correlate loosely. At least you build that alignment around the team, because yes, this effort is great in the long run if you can connect it back to business outcomes. But crawl, walk, run, just having the goal out there for 6 weeks, 12 weeks, a year helps align the team and helps them stay organized. And that way, every engineer, every designer, every product person, every tester is seeing what they're working on and saying, hey, this actually doesn't move us towards our goal. Should we be thinking differently about this? So number one thing that you can do is set better expectations on those outcomes. Any questions on that one before we move to our second of 3 quizzes here?
Oh God, there's more.
There's more quizzes. I didn't have time to plan a breakout room session, so I decided to give you guys a lot of homework today instead.
There's a teacher's evaluation at the end of this, though, right?
Well, if I do have if anyone wants the version of this, that's just a Google form that you can take the whole assessment. Email Jason Brett, he'll figure it out, and he can get it to you. So take a look at the second one. I'll give everyone a minute to take a look, and I guess asking for a brave volunteer of if anyone does better or worse on this one compared to the first one. All right. Anyone how'd people do on this one compared to the last one? Better, worse? Any brave volunteers?
I'll talk. So I just was chatting in there. I did better, but the reality is that first question was a 1. And while the other ones are high, if you've got a 1 in the first one, doesn't really help. And then 6, I would say, is a 1. I don't know if my colleagues would agree. So overall better, but not necessarily the way we want to be organized.
Yeah. Anyone else?
You, Amy, I am. Oh, sorry, Jason. I did much better on this one. At least when I think about, my teams under my product portfolio, but number 2 is where we fell apart, because on the product side, on the business side, the people are dedicated. They almost never leave unless they're leaving the company, and I've had to actually replace the product owner or something like that due to attrition. But the IT side, the development side, cycles off just randomly. Just got an email literally the other day going, hey, the director on the development side is just flipping for no reason. The other one didn't leave the company. We decided to change hats, take a break, go to Hawaii, do something different. I don't know. So, it's just that creates a lot of unnecessary drama. And I get the need to keep things fresh and bring different perspectives in, but I think number 2 is so important, right? Because you lose all of that legacy knowledge, understanding, just even the team building. We're back to storming and norming versus we were just killing it on the performing.
Yeah.
So
those switches take 3 to 9 months to work out in terms of a team's performance. And I don't think people realize like the impact of changing team members out in continuity, but it takes 3 to 9 months to get to that performing stage. And so, yeah, so,
I was
really,
just, we have some of that. I think everybody does, but we also have legacy developers where they're here for the duration, but trying to change mindsets and legacy systems creates another uphill battle.
ooh, that's I'll submit another talk on software migration patterns and changing architectures. But so I think
Jason, I'm just curious, a good score is between what, 25 and 30. I mean, do you find people that are doing really well?
Very rarely, I would say. I'd say where teams get lost, like product and design and like tech and data teams are still not cohesive in a lot of organizations. Like they report up to different executives and their loyalty is functional, not to the product that they work on. And so you end up with a lack of cohesion. Long-term dedication and context switching is a big problem. Number 3, and then kind of 4 and 6. I think on 3, these clearly defined boundaries is really hard for a lot of organizations. What's called fracture planes of where is there logical breaks in the product and who owns what. Especially for organizations that have a very large platform team that are building APIs, and understanding that architecture can get really confusing for people for who's owning what piece of it. And there's a lot of drops in the experience. And then 4 and 6, a lot of organizations that haven't really embraced DevOps, they still have a release management function. They still have QA that is separate as a team. They haven't prioritized test automation. And so, and then again, ideally in product, you build it, you own it. I understand the need to have maintenance teams and site reliability engineers and that type of things, but there's still this ops versus dev mentality in a lot of organizations that it creates the wrong incentive structure, because if I'm not going to have to fix my bugs in prod, I don't have that incentive to code well and document things to remind myself later. It's going to be someone else's issue. And so you have a lot of teams that don't have skin in the game for the quality. I think going back to the question about bringing in external help, that's one of the problems sometimes is outside partners, they know they're going to drop at a certain date, so they don't have skin in the game for what happens to their recommendations. And maybe it's a PowerPoint and they don't have to worry about the feasibility of the ideas. They just get paid for having good ideas. And so making sure people have the right incentives and skin in the game across the life cycle is important.
I would say that I've actually worked at a number of places where number 6 isn't even in the conversation. That's on some places I would say that technical debt is graduate level studies, right? And kind of some organizations just don't get there yet, or it keeps getting pushed because it's generally either a time cost or a revenue cost. It's not a moneymaker. It's not something fun or sexy. And if you have, some org chart changes, or you have people that are trying to drive towards KPIs, I mean, very rarely do KPIs even cover technical debt, right? It's kind of just, literally swept under the rug often. So
I find you have to approach it as, really keeping the business running. You have to make the business case, sadly, sometimes for technical debt, or I have in my past, not just where I am now, honestly, but and say, if we don't do this, then X could happen, and either the risk of X or the business impact and actual dollars of X, right, are so significant that then leadership goes, okay, fine, yes, you're right. You do need to dedicate some of your product roadmap and capacity to.
But it has to get to that point where it's increasing in risk before it gets addressed, kind of general, unless it gets part of your standard house cleaning or whatever.
So the helpful thing there when I'm trying to explain this to non-technical folks and build a case for it, I explain not working on technical debt is not paying the principal on your credit card, and just paying the interest every month and the minimum payment, and that's what you're doing. And so technical debt is principal. and tying it to real world debt, people will connect with that a little bit, and you have to start paying it down, because eventually you're just going to be treading water. And I think a lot of organizations are running into this problem now because hitting that capacity limit, they've tried to scale linearly as they wanted to do more things, and the overhead and the technical debt has just become prohibitive to innovation, and so it's important there. So two quick wins for your organization related to team structure. I'm not going to try to restructure anyone's company on the call here today, but I think just asking yourself a question of where's the bottleneck today? Is it leadership translating vision to the team? Is it being able to come up with the right solution aligned to that? Is it getting requirements and design to a definition of done? Is it during the development process? Is it testing integration? Is it release? Like, what is your bottleneck as an organization? And focus just on removing your biggest number one bottleneck of where progress gets stopped in the process. So that's very quick thing is like, think of your organization in terms of bottlenecks. I think the second thing is, where does feedback get lost? So what is the missing feedback loop back to your team? And it's really helpful. There's two types of feedback that we have to think about in product. Short loop feedback is going from a release and users back to the product team to influence what we're working on in our next sprint, our next program increment, whatever it might be, our next release. Long loop feedback is we're learning something from our users that is changing our long-term strategy. Like, we've been influenced where something about, we have learned a new assumption that our strategy is fundamentally wrong. We thought we'd be able to drive users through XYZ experience. We thought they would pay this. We are seeing leading indicators that suggest that we have to change that core assumption. And a lot of people do short loop feedback, but there's no long loop feedback to get to executives and business stakeholders on setting that strategy. You know, they want to bring in their executive consulting firm once a year to do their strategy deck, and then they want to hand it to people, and it's going to be 18 months to 3 years of value. And I think not valuing the iterative release cycle of Agile and informing that strategy gets missed in a lot of large organizations. So quick win number 2, quick win number 3. I think a couple other things of just a quick, like, if this and that. If your teams don't have ownership, identify that bottleneck. We talked about setting agreed metrics. Cognitive load, if your team's spread too thin, if they're constantly having to learn new pieces of your organization, consider splitting your team. Really, people shouldn't be learning new services, new like parts of the front end, like new components. Like, they shouldn't be moving between that many products. You're better off having 2 small teams, even if you have to spread a product person across them, versus asking people to context switch constantly. Efficiency, if you find your teams are spending a lot of time in meetings, or there's too much overhead for managing those relationships, again, make your team smaller. So ideal team size between 5 and 9 people. Beyond that, there's all these different ways of looking at it, but going from 5 people on a team to 7 people doubles the amount of relationships between those people and the amount of communication needed. So a lot of people don't appreciate the overhead to a larger team of keeping all of those people aligned. And so you're taking your most senior people, and rather than having them do work, you're having them keeping other people aligned to work. And so think about managing that. And then, determining how to collaborate with other teams. Won't have time to go all the way into team topologies today, but I will share some of my favorite laws when it comes to team organization and team size. So if you're having a conversation with somebody and trying to convince them of something, and I like to use these, and people are like, oh, there's a law, okay, I have to listen to it, that type of thing. So Gall's law, which is all complex systems that work evolve from simpler systems. So start simple. Conway's law, which is organizations are, they produce designs which are copies of communication structure of their organizations. So if you have a wacky org chart, that's what your architecture is going to look like. This gets played out time and time again, but if you have, 3 different product teams, you're going to end up with 3 different products that are deployed differently unless you define what those boundaries are. Parkinson's law, we've touched on that one. And this last one regarding teams is one of my favorites. Brooks' law, which is adding manpower to a late software project makes it later. So this false concept that you can add more people to something that's behind and it's going to speed it up. So some of the favorite laws. I think we're running out of time. I'll send these slides out, but the last one was going to be around some user testing frameworks as well, and like different ways of testing for different products. I did want to jump down here. In terms of if you're interested in OKRs and better management, I would definitely recommend Measure What Matters. In terms of improving empathy and validation, continuous discovery habits, team topology is a great one if you really want to understand like structures of teams within organizations. And then if you're looking at end-to-end software development lifecycle, looking at things like enterprise Kanban and leveraging that, Lean Enterprise is one I'd recommend. So I'll pause there. Any questions, thoughts, reflections?
Jason did say that he would share the assessment. So in case in case you did not see that, make sure you reach out and he'll shoot that over.
Jason, I made a copy of it for Product Coffee, so I'll send that to you.
Hey, Jason, I was wondering if you had some tips on how to manage, I'm going to say, inter-products communication or collaboration. So I'm going to speak on my side where we're doing hardware. So basically somebody's taking care, like there's a team taking care of the hardware, one team taking care of the firmware, one team taking care of the software, and another one of the OS. And basically each and every one is delivering their parts, that's for sure, but the cohesion throughout the entire product and the solution that we deliver to the customer is not there, basically.
Yeah.
So how can you help on that?
So I'd say two quick things. One is determine the relationship between each team and their needs with each other. So there's really kind of three patterns of interaction: collaborative, facilitative, and as a service. And so, if you've got like a firmware team, they're really providing a service to your front end team where like they have to look at themselves as the front end team is the customer of that team. So, getting them in the mindset that, hey, this other product team is my customer and like they are defining what success looks like can help because they are, providing that service up the stack. Versus collaborative means those teams need to actually plan together for requirements. I mean, I think Agile has its complexities with hardware, because with that, anytime you're doing like Bluetooth, Wi-Fi connectivity, like people forget that connectivity is a feature and it gets deprioritized. And like most of the problems there is just not usually working. And so having that mindset is important. I think the other thing is like doing a forcing function around continuous integration and integrating more and having a much higher level of test coverage between teams where teams are having to run end-to-end tests and writing those test cases for user experience versus trying to bring that all together at the end in a larger hardening phase. So, doing a tech spike around, hey, what our test coverage is, different people have different standards for it, but really nailing that end-to-end is important, especially, I don't know a ton about the product, but there's a lot of regulatory compliance as well that you have to comply with around a lot of that technology too. So the cycles of development are always going to be longer, but if you can integrate, even if you're not releasing sooner, it'll help catch those things upstream versus putting it endstream when teams have moved on to other features in the next release and they're having to go back.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
The Lean Enterprise book actually has some really good use cases from an HP team that was having like issues between their firmware team, their hardware team, and their software teams, and how they reprioritized how they were managing their time to work together. So that's got a good one. Any other questions or thoughts before we all have to go back to reality of our day jobs?
I think we'll probably wrap it right there. Thank you so much. I learned a lot. I learned something, I think, every session I join. So I appreciate that. And thank you for your time today. So just thank you everyone that's here and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, Jason, Rome.
Thanks, team.